Hey, welcome everybody to LTADchat. Here we are with another episode, and this is really a forum for those who are interested in sharing conversations about how kids move, how they develop fitness and health, and not really only physical health, but also psychologically and socially as well, in the spirit of holistic human development. And LTADchat is becoming a good resource for students, coaches, parents, physical education teachers, sport med docs, and really anybody who wants to provide youngsters a really positive experience through sport or movement. My name is Joe Eisman, and along with my colleagues Tony Moreno and Rick Howard, host these LTAD chat sessions. And today I'm really happy to be joined by my friends and former colleagues from USA Football, Michael Kruger and Andy Ryland, to discuss what's going on at USA Football in terms of their athlete development model. And this is really a timely topic as we're in this few weeks leading up to the NFL Super Bowl. Mike, Andy, welcome to LTAD Chat.
Joe, thank you so much. It's such an incredible honor and a privilege to be here on behalf of our staff, especially our education team, who says hello to you and the great work that you continue to do. It's really an honor to be here and super excited to talk to you about long-term athlete development, but kind of what we're doing with that and continuing some of the great work that you laid a foundation for, and we're super excited to be chatting about it today.
Great. Thanks for that shout out, Mike, about some of that work. And Andy, a lot of car rides between me and you, buddy, talking about some of this stuff. So it's going to be great to get on and kind of see where we're moving down the road.
I was about to say, when it comes to some of that work, we were at year one. You know, like I said, the car rides, the trips, the monitoring youth football, the talking to pilot leagues. You were there year one. Obviously, a huge influence on me. So it's really cool to kind of get a check in now. You know, a couple years later, and what's happened and what are the goals are and what we've seen, both good and bad, and where maybe we've had some successes that could help someone else, or things, blind spots that we know we still need to work on. So hopefully the sharing just helps others that are going through similar processes.
Yeah, great. Hey, before we get rolling here, why don't you just share with everybody what your role is at USA Football?
Yeah, I'll kick off. I'm Senior Director of Football Education there at USA Football. I have a background that's primarily in athletic administration and education. So I came to USA Football a couple of years ago after a career as an educator in athletic administration. Still stayed very involved with the National Athletic Directors Association, the NFHS, the high school space. It's been a great growing and learning opportunity for me to move more into the youth space as well and expand my horizons that way. But in my background's actually in teaching and counseling, as well as in kinesiology and biomechanics. So have a lengthy coaching career. Another nice way of saying I'm an old guy, and but 20 plus year coaching in a couple of different sports, but really enjoy what I did there, and the opportunity to continue that educator's role at USA Football and really embrace the platform of football and the platform that sport gives us, as Joe, you mentioned, to develop a child from a holistic perspective. And so it's pretty exciting to be on a team, and I get to work with some of the most phenomenal teammates, and want to be on this with them today. You know the talent that Andy is, and the rest of our education team, but Andy's influence on what we've done and what we continue to do is incredible. So I'm really blessed to be able to work alongside him every day.
Great.
Well, Mike's check is in the mail, but I work under Mike in our education department, title Senior Manager of Education and Training. I take a little bit more of the training role. So, and I mean training from the NGB level as far as coach certification, the training of the coach educators that help us deliver our education. Serve mostly as a technical editor and technical writer. I have a background as a football coach. Was trained, did my undergrad and my internships and everything as a strength and conditioning coach before I got into sport coaching. So a nice mix there of addressing some of the physical side of things, which is still a passion of mine. I still really enjoy. And then working on the technical skill side and what things will look like as they go out to the coaches so that they can then implement with their team. So I serve mostly in that role, as kind of getting out, delivering clinics, delivering education, or writing and editing for online materials.
Great. Thanks, guys, for sharing that background. And we're going to cover a little bit today what we've done in a few previous episodes. Andy, you were part of one of those episodes with the legendary high school coach, Mike Kirshner, when we discussed developing the whole person, using experiences from football. And then there's a second episode in which staff from the USOPC and associated governing bodies, Andy said NGB, so just so everybody's clear on this call, National Governing Body, or NGB, where in that episode we discussed the overall American development model and its implementation across the NGBs. Now, USA Football is another one of those NGBs, or National Governing Bodies of Sport, under that USOPC umbrella. And they have developed and began to implement the FDM, the Football Development Model, with both Andy and Mike being instrumental. So you can check out the USA Football Development Model at the link that's going to be provided here on the screen, and it's going to be given throughout this episode as well. But to get things kicked off, Mike, let's just do 30,000-foot view, a general overview of the FDM, and then we're going to be getting into some specifics throughout the show as well.
Thanks, Joe. You know, it started with something you guys had talked about earlier. It really started with us diving in with the concept of game types, and then we rolled out an idea that I know you were instrumental in, Andy, as well, and rookie tackle, and that idea of taking the USOPC's American Development Model and looking at the universal principles of that model, and asking ourselves, how can we adopt that to fit the sport of football, and what fits what. And when the time when I came in, we were having success with game types at the time, with introducing rookie tackle as a game that made the field a little bit smaller, removed a few players, very similar to what hockey had done. And think about what they had done with their model, you know, shorter space to move in, fewer players, with some smaller size games type idea. We took that and said, okay, how do we keep expanding? And one of the things we did early on was looked at other NGB's development models. We looked at hockey, we looked at US lacrosse, we looked at, I'll be honest with you, we learned something from so many different governing bodies. I'm talking archery, swimming, the ones I mentioned, you know, volleyball, basketball. We looked at everything, and we said, how can we take what's been very successful there and apply it to the sport of football? And one of the things we did early on was said, okay, we know there's a space here for game types. So if you look at our development model, probably the best way to conceptually visualize it is in two primary buckets. One is through game types, which rookie tackle, we've expanded that even. We've said, if you can learn the game of progression, hence the game of flag football, where does flag football fit into that progression? How do we teach these skills? And the idea for us on the game type side of things is alignment. So if you start here in this part of the game and you continue to grow and you progress through the game, we want to offer as many options and entry points as we can that can teach the game in that progression. The other big bucket we looked at was the individual skill development, because you know such a huge part of that is long-term athlete development, and how do we really look at the way that we develop football players through the conduit of the game itself. So we broke that down, and we ended up doing was identifying the core skills that are involved in the game of football. So passing, receiving, obviously the foundations of athleticism in general. We looked also at kicking and punting as those things. And of course you have the contact skills, which I know Andy will touch on here in a little bit. But even if you're not playing a contact game, are there skills you can learn that still help prepare you for that? Whether you stay in the flag or non-contact game space for forever, that's your chosen pathway, or if you move into the contact space. The idea for us was, how do we create the foundation of a very solid athlete that can be successful regardless if they play this game, if they play that game, but provided in a progression. And we broke those skills down. We looked at the skill elements that make up those core skills, and then broke it down even another level further into the key performance indicators that identify those skills. So that's really a 30,000-foot view of what we did. We broke it down individually into progressive skills, and here's what you should be doing at this developmental level if you've never played before, if you're at this age, if you're at this stage of development, here's how you learn the game of football. Here's how you learn how to throw. Here's how you learn how to catch. Here's how you learn how to run. And we did that. And then on the flip side said, okay, here's a game type that'll allow you to excel in those. And we built those out at the same time.
Great. Thanks for that overview, Mike. Really appreciate it. And you mentioned, yeah, Andy's going to talk to us about contact skills because there's such a unique feature of this game, right? Blocking and tackling are just unique to American football. And, you know, Andy being former collegiate football player, linebacker, USA rugby athlete, being a coach and having that strength and conditioning background, one thing I've always appreciated from Andy and listening to him and learning from him is this idea of the importance of general physical preparation that's specific to contact. So Andy, let's talk about some of these ideas and thoughts that you have about the importance of general physical preparation for contact in the sport of football.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we know that sports skills don't live in isolation. They're underpinned by physical capacities and physical capabilities. And so there's a couple of different roads this can travel down. But you know, for the youth coach or the entry level coach, you know, if we put all our eggs in the skill basket with athletes who are still developing physically, we're actually hurting their ability to learn the skill, because we could, you know, easily identify some things, especially with the contact skills around, you know, spatial awareness, kinesthetic awareness, strength, core stability, balance. Like if I don't have those things, then I'm going to struggle in the contact skill. So I could continue to give a lecture on the mechanics of blocking, but if the athlete doesn't have the ability to hold a fairly good core posture and lacks the spatial and kinesthetic awareness to put their arms where they want to, like, are any of those coaching cues even meaningful, or are we just wasting our breath? So if we can develop an athlete who's starting to understand how their body moves, they can connect it to, say, the direction of the sports skill, and then they can actually implement the skill. And you know, this goes for a lot of sports, but you know, you always see this when there's a youngsters out on the field and some coach is getting frustrated and yelling about them needing to stay low. Well, with, you know, bad leg strength and no core strength and poor mobility and flexibility and no concept of being able to kinesthetically feel their own spinal position, they're not getting in the position the coach wants. So we need to find, and we think, you know, creative games and experiences and activities that we can develop that, so that if a coach is developing a quality practice that's maybe including some tumbling, some grappling, some crawling, that's going to address some of the physical characteristics we think are specifically associated with contact, as well as obviously the skill portion of practice, they're kind of attacking the problem from both ends. And we have a better chance of the athletes kind of maturing and growing into learning that. And then, you know, so we talk about they're underpinned by physical skills. The coaching cues are meaningless, but there's also this great physical, psychological interplay with contact skills that athletes often really struggle with. So we use the term, you know, the frictions of two bodies blocking or tackling and fighting and grappling and pushing and pulling. Some athletes might just be really uncomfortable with that. And so before I can address it from a football specific standpoint, it may be much easier for me to address from a general physical preparation standpoint, where we're doing some creative games and activities that involve physical pressures of, you know, of a partner. We're doing push-pull games. We're doing grappling-based games. We're doing crawling exercises that are great for spatial awareness and kinesthetic feel and coordination, but they're also developing some, you know, some shoulder girdle strength and some core strength and the ability to hold in a triple flexed position. Well, you know, we're developing that athlete, plus we're also getting them comfortable with the ground. We're getting them comfortable psychologically in personal spaces and personal bubbles and with frictions. And that can unlock sometimes an athlete's ability to use their sports skill. So I think if we just look at sports skill in the lens of football, we're really limiting the tools that we can to develop the athlete. And especially at the youth level, they tend to need more general and less specific means to understand and get better. So, simply tumbling and getting comfortable with the ground may make me play, quote, more aggressively because I'm not afraid of falling down and I'm not afraid of getting in a pile, and I have the tools to manage going to the ground, and I know what a little bump feels like. And I actually developed some great spatial awareness and coordination doing it. So now I know how to control myself when I'm in these situations. So, it's not that it's not that we don't love our sports skills. It's just that we're being smart enough to know that if we don't address the underpinnings, those coaches are probably going to pull their hair out, and it's not necessarily the kid's fault. Like he needs those things before he can do the cool things you want him to do.
Yeah, awesome, Andy. Hey, we're going to move on to flag football a little bit because we talked about game types. But before I let Mike talk about game types, Andy, a little bit more on contact and preparation for contact, because we've talked about this before about how important flag can also be, right? To
Yeah.
tackling. So let's talk through that a little bit, and your thoughts on why flag may be a good precursor to tackle to the ground.
Yeah, so obviously flag has a ton of advantages. One, a lot of movement skills because everyone is eligible. So everyone is running pass routes and everyone is covering someone. Well, simply stated, like youngsters learning to stay in front of another youngster, like can happen in a variety of different ways. Now, you may turn into an offensive lineman who has to stay in front of a defensive lineman, but we can develop that in a really fun experience in a fun way by having you do that on the flag football field. When we look at tackling, we actually use the exact same progression and the exact same terminology to teach tackling as we do to teach flag pulling. The first thing being like we have to track our opponent and close the space to the opponent. Well, that's the same in football or flag football, right? We're going to transition from sprint mechanics or movement mechanics and kind of come to balance at this moment of truth so that we can accurately grab the flag, or eventually come to balance in good postures so that we can accurately take contact. So we absolutely can layer and scaffold the exact same skills. And if a program has a really good structure, they're using the same terminologies about, hey, track the opponent, hey, give them a one-way go, hey, we're always going to choose a side, hey, preparation, like we can use these key buzzwords that are exactly the same. So it's not like we have to reteach them when they turn the tackle. Now we just say, okay, guys, or gals, you're excellent at tracking and you know how to come to balance and be in this good position. Now we're going to add connection. So now I'm going to teach you what a shoulder connection looks like. And now we're, so we're just layering that skill on top of each other. The other thing is we talked about the general physical development. Well, flag is a highly athletic game, again, because everyone is eligible and therefore everyone has to cover and everyone runs pass routes. So we're getting great general physical development. And if a coach or an organization is really doing a great job, incorporate some of the prep for contact materials as part of their athletic development period. So when we do our practice plans, we have a 5 to 10 minute period of practice after the warm up that we call athletic development. And one day we may be working on running and jumping and cutting. And some days we're going to use our prep for contact materials. Now, as Mike said, you may stay in the flag football game, but things like crawling and tumbling and grappling are just such rich kind of growth environments for kids that they really learn so much about balance and strength and movement. So it's an investment in the flag player just becoming a better athlete. But if that athlete does move to contact, it serves as a great springboard because they've been doing this age appropriate kind of strength work through crawling, and they've been doing some grappling drills to help the psychological side as well as learn frictions. And obviously it's unbelievable strength work when you're pushing and pulling and fighting and battling. We're doing these things where it's, hey, first person to cross the line wins, and it's this really fun based manner. But that can really help ease the transition into the contact game because we've built a sound fancy, a robust movement toolbox, and we've got a year of getting this prep for contact curriculum under their belt, so that the first time they're allowed in someone's personal space with friction isn't when a coach is yelling at them to block or tackle. It's part of a thought out plan for their development.
Great, thanks, Andy. Mike, let's move on to flag and the, where we are in this space in the landscape in the United States about the adoption of flag. And even for that matter, the modified games, rookie tackle and whatnot, but, kind of maybe focus on flag a bit here as part of the pathway. And obviously there's barriers, there's some resistance to flag football. But let's hear some success stories that you have about, programs around the United States that have really taken hold of the FDM, the game type model, flag, rookie, and then on to, 11 player and whatnot, but maybe a little bit more focus on flag and what's going on in the US related to flag football.
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question. And I think if we start in the context of thinking of flag, as you know, the challenge is probably to get the game types aligned, because there's a little bit of a perception out there that flag football is not truly football because it doesn't have the contact aspect to it. So you got flag over here, and then you got tackle over here, and there's this tendency to think, well, they're in their own little environment, that they're in their own little columns. What we're attempting to do when you start to think about long-term athlete development, you start to think about a progressive model of skill progression. Flag football is a great entry level to start doing things Andy just talked about. So if we broaden perspective and we start to think about developing a foundation of athleticism, and so you think about this, think of the research that shows the detriments of sports specification. Why don't we want to encourage athletes to just, we don't want them just to focus on one sport. We also don't want within a sport to have them focus on just one position. The reason is because we want to have them develop their overall athleticism, and we want them to develop that foundation of good athletic skill. Flag football is a great opportunity as an entry level point for young players, especially to develop that overall athleticism. Part of the reason that we are excited that flag is growing is because of I think in the last, and it's been ongoing, but it's the last couple of decades where the opportunities for free and unstructured play have really reduced, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The first one everybody always thinks is, the video game industry just getting more and more popular and kids aren't going outside, but I would also challenge back and say, that some of the cuts to physical education classes and those kinds of things have been playing an important, having important impact as well. But the bottom line is those skills that kids would get from just playing in the sandlot or on the playground or in the backyard in the neighborhood, being outside and just with unstructured play, we aren't getting those same skills. And that was multi-sport development, by the way, when we're playing outside. We'd make up our own rules. You guys, how that was when we were growing up. Our parents had to tell us to get inside when the lights, when the street lights came on. Now we're trying to get our kids to go outside and play. We have to provide those opportunities in the sport landscape now as much as possible, because they're not getting that strong athletic foundation with the limited unstructured play and free play. And then what we do when they get to structured play is we start to make it more and more structured and put all these parameters around it and learn these sport-specific skills, as opposed to saying what happened to developing a solid foundation of athleticism. So that's why the growth in flag football is starting. I think we see it as a real great opportunity, and it is growing. It's the fastest growing game type in the country right now. I think of leagues, you would ask, some success stories. The nice thing about flag football and the limited game types and the modified game types are one of the pillars of the football development model is multiple entry points and options. Where can we have a young boy, young girl enter into the game at a level or at a game type that's comfortable for them? And I'll also throw this caveat in there, that's also comfortable for their parents to learn the game and to experience the game and have them grow where they're comfortable. Flag offers that opportunity. Limited game types like padded flag football or tackle bar or rookie tackle into the contact game provide those. So where are we seeing success stories? In Iowa, in We're seeing Scott Heitland in the league there that they're working in youth football in Iowa is having great success with a progressive model that has the modified game types. Their participation numbers are growing, but more importantly, their retention numbers are growing. Kids are having fun. They're engaged in the game. They're learning the game at a pace and at a speed, at an intensity level that's really comfortable for them based on their development. And the cool thing about that is they're learning the game. Thinking at from an educator's perspective, how can I give them from a cognitive and from a volume intensity level, can I present the game in a way that keeps them engaged, allows them to have fun, but still learn? That should be our goal. We're educators of the game. That should be our goal, is to find where they're at developmentally and do that. Flag allows us to do that. And because of that, flag experience and the flag experience is growing. Now, the challenge for us is how do we continue to align and make sure one of the statements we make is any football, when it's taught correctly, is good football. If that's at the flag level, the limited contact level, or the full contact level, the bottom line is we're teaching it correctly, we're teaching it in progression, and we're teaching it in a way that engages that player where they're at developmentally.
Yeah, super. There's a lot of music to my ears here. Like, you guys have talked about general athleticism so much, and that being really the foundation to everything. And I mean, that cuts across every NGB, right? Like, that's a staple in the American development model. Athlete first, and then whatever the sport is second, because we need to cross pollinate too. Like, all the NGBs are talking about, not early specialization. Well, that means that a lot of the stuff that we do should be sport agnostic, right? And that's just this general physical preparation. The other thing I just heard you say was the cognitive aspect of it, because with flag football and these young kids, and the three of us have seen this before, we go to a flag game, and I mean, the playbook is still yay thick, right? And you have a coach, they line the kid up here, they line the next kid up, they line the next kid up. And you mentioned unstructured play. I mean, my favorite days of football were ripping around in the backyard, drawing plays in the dirt, right? That was our playbook. And we might have had five plays, but there's this cognitive load sometimes that we put too much cognitive load on the tactical part of the game, the X's and O part of the game, rather than really stepping back and focusing on general athletic development, learning just the fundamental sport skill, reducing that cognitive load because of the age, right? The developmental age, cognitive age of that individual, and just letting these kids rip around in what basically becomes a game of tag.
I agree with you.
100%.
Yeah, I say it's a value and intention argument. I have a lot of, people will say, well, we value good athletes. We test athleticism, by the way, with things like combines and that kind of thing. We're testing, we're testing speed and jumping ability and lateral movement and kinesthetic awareness, those types of things. So it isn't, so for us, and even in the space, it isn't so much a question of value, but it is a question of intention. Are we intentionally doing that? As Andy said, where in my practice am I helping these kids learn how to grow those athletic foundations? Am I providing opportunities? We think that because they're out for football and we're going to put a football in their hands, that by osmosis, they're going to become faster, stronger, more flexible. No, we have to be intentional about the way we plan our practices, which leads me to my point here, Joe, is that even in the space as educators, we value it, but we have to make sure that coaches understand it but more importantly, have the resources available to them to implement it. And I think that's an area where we continue to need to grow. We know in space, we know what ADM means, we know what physical literacy is, but you're talking to a mom and a dad that are out there, they're volunteer coaching, because if they didn't, then their kiddo might not have a team. And what we need to provide them with the resources to stress this over and over and over. It's about developing athletes. Our success pathway in the football development model is human, athlete, football player. And if we don't build them in that order, we're not going to help that athlete reach their full potential. We're not going to develop what we want is better football players, but we got to start with developing better athletes, because a great football player can't ever reach that potential if we don't build a great athlete first. And before we can build a great athlete, we got to focus on the human, the cognitive, the whole child as developed. We got to have that in place first. Then we can follow that success path.
And I think to the cognitive load, flag makes a great entry point for a couple reasons. So that those that aren't familiar, typically flag is played 5-on-5 or 7-on-7. So it's a reduced number of players on the field. It's typically played on a smaller field, right, which fits smaller bodies much better. And then everyone is eligible. And we run some pass routes, and yes, coaches may get overzealous in their playbook, but they're at the end. People are trying to get open, and they end up dancing and doing their stuff anyway. There's a little bit of breakdown. So the cognitive load of understanding 5-on-5 on a small size field is much more manageable. And from a coaching player interaction standpoint, one of the common complaints you'll hear about young players' entry into football is that they found practices a little boring because you're trying to get 11 players organized, and the adult values, right, working in martial unison to execute a play to perfection. Like, well, that's not what kids are really after. Kids want to snap the ball as many times as possible and try to get open and catch a pass. Like, that's the engaging part. So by reducing the players, it reduces some of the structure and allows the kids to just kind of play a little bit more. But to Joe's point, the skills are still incredibly valuable. Like the passing and catching is obviously a huge part of the game. Not only is that a general skill for athletes and kids to learn, but it's hugely important in the game of football. Whether it's covering and running coverage and running a route, or it's being a ball carrier and trying to pull the flag, the evasion and tracking aspect of the game is massive. So we are addressing high quality, important characteristics. We're just doing it in this cognitively appropriate manner. And so those, oh, it's not real football, there's not blocking and tackling. That just goes back to the stair-step approach of, yes, but we can layer those on once players have a good grasp of evasion and tracking. Well, if I know evasion and tracking well, then I can add in the contact aspect of the tackle at a later stage. And I'm really not missing anything in my development. I'm deliberately doing it in smaller chunks, so hopefully it's more comprehensible for the cognitive side of whatever age we happen to play. And it could be an older athlete who's just new to football, right? So we expect an older athlete who's more cognitively mature to learn those skills and develop quicker, but it doesn't mean that they still don't need to develop those initial skills. So it can be a great entry point at a variety of ages, just for the first time player who wants to generally understand some of the principal concepts.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about modified game too, because I think we may have kind of blown past that a little bit. And I want to make sure everybody's like really clear. We talked about game types. We spent a little bit of time now talking about flag and the importance of flag as an entry point in. And, Andy, you're kind of talking about the cognitive load and, 11v11, right? On this big field. And that's this whole purpose of this intermediate step, if I may use that term, right? It's this intermediate level where we go from flag to reduce field size, reduce player number, or whatever. So do you guys want to talk to us about rookie tackle and some of the other variations of rookie tackle that are being played across the US as part of this stair step approach to getting people and teams to 11v11 on the full size field?
I'll jump in on this one. So I think there's two general categories of modified game, and one is going to be a modified contact. So we may play something like padded flag, in which we're introducing blocking and block defeat, but we're going to stay with flag pulling so that we're not using a full tackle. So that's a great way to deliberately, intentionally, as Mike says, slow down the skill introduction process. As a coach and as a player, if the second stage of my journey, I only have to learn 2 new contact skills instead of 3 contact skills, it's probably a little easier on me. We've worked with the Tackle Bar group, and they have a product that is kind of in between a flag and a full tackle, where there's shoulder connection, some grappling. You are allowed to resist the runner's movement, and we pull a bar that's located on their lower back. So we're introducing very entry-level contact without going to the ground. And that's, again, a way to modify the contact. The other game type in rookie tackle is the example, is that we're going to be full contact, but we're going to modify the space and numbers. So we may decide that as a league, as an organization, wherever we are in the country, that we want athletes at this age group to start playing full contact, which means blocking, block defeat, and tackling all three contact skills. Well, in order to do that, the cognitive load that will reduce on the athletes is the number of players on the field and the field size. So in both those situations, we're just looking at which variable are we going to affect, but we're going to deliberately add something and deliberately hold something back so that we have this nice stair-step approach instead of the traditional jump, which was 5-on-5 non-contact, 11-on-11 full contact. I mean, that's a massive jump. So if I could go 5-on-5 non-contact, let's say I go, I don't know, 5-on-5 or 7-on-7 padded flag, where I still am on a smaller field. I'm introducing some contact skills, but not all of them. Then I go to 8-on-8 full contact. Now I've learned a new contact skill, but I'm still playing on a smaller field. And maybe I've introduced one new player, so that the total number of players, the total cognitive load, total decision making is slightly less. Then we move to full contact. So we're just trying to meet the athletes where they are from a growth potential, and we're always teaching good, high quality skills. We just don't think like, just because you're playing football doesn't mean you have to learn all of those skills in year one. We can take that slow cooking approach and actually spread them out over a couple years to allow coaches the time to really teach. Less things equals, more focus, and the players to really get a good foundational understanding of thing one before we ask them to learn thing two. Again, their cognitive energies aren't so divided on all this new stuff.
Andy, you're making too much sense. This sounds way too logical. But we know it's challenging, and we're going to talk about some of those challenges here in a bit. But, I kind of want to talk about high school football coaches in this process. Andy, you were on again with Coach Kirshner, and Coach Cade, described his feeder program, and we talk about long-term athlete development or whatever, and it confuses coaches and parents. Guys, it's a feeder program, right? Long-term athlete development is a feeder program, and Coach K seems to be doing some really neat stuff where he brings in, elementary kids, middle school kids. He introduces them, to technical and tactical aspects, but he's also doing some physical prep with them. So the question is, is this an approach that USA Football is embracing and trying to promote? And, specifically, again, getting the high school football coach, right? Often seen as, right, the key stakeholder within a community. Again, it depends on the size of the community, but where we have these communities where kids and parents, they look up to the high school football program, and that high school football coach is such a major player. To get that high school football coach to buy in and promote this developmental approach, where does USA Football stand with regards to promoting that, or, trying to get high school coaches to do that approach?
Yeah, I'll take that, Joe. Just from, that's my background. I come from high school athletic administration coaching, and you really hit the nail on the head with there. We also see that the high school coach is instrumental. He or she is the vital stakeholder key to that success in their youth programs. And you're exactly right. High school coaches that we talk to, I remember specifically being at a state coaches training for Indiana about a year ago, and we were talking about, we were going round table, and they were having each table kind of talk about what would you want as a high school coach? What would you, if you could wave a magic wand and you could have anything with your athletes coming into ninth grade, what would you want? What would your desire be? And I'm sitting at one of the tables I haven't presented yet, and I'm going to present on the FDM and talk about progression and athletic foundations. So this is like they set this up on a tee for a softball for me. And it gets to the last table. And I fully anticipated some coach at some point, high school coach, to say, Well, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd make sure that each player was 6'6" and 280. But didn't get that. But the very last table, the coach said, he stood up and he said, honestly, if they just knew how to run, I'd be 10 times ahead, because I have to teach my freshmen how to actually run, the mechanics of running. And he goes, if you knew how much time I spent going through these basic things like how to run correctly. And now I'm stepping up right after this discussion and I'm talking about FDM. So here's what I tell you though, high school coaches, and I mentioned Scott Heitland earlier, Dallas Center Grimes High School in Iowa, has worked so closely with his youth football league there and is intimately involved with the progression that they do. So there's, again, I'll use the word alignment. When there's alignment and there's common language and there's this understanding and a buy-in to the philosophy that we have to create good athletes, because we can't, again, if we jump right to at the high school level, if we say, remember that success pathway, if we jump right to football player and we say, hey, we're just going to build great football players, we know as educators, we know as teachers of the game, we know as scientists that you can't help that football player reach their full potential if they haven't developed the skills. They can't actually perform these advanced skills that we're asking them to perform. So a high school coach has an incredible obligation and responsibility to make sure that they are involved with or know what's happening in their feeder programs for the success of their own program. It's totally a self-serving thing there, but your ultimate responsibility to your program is to know what kind of athletes are coming in here. And the more you can adopt a long-term athlete development model, in this case, the football development model for football, your program is going to be the beneficiaries of that. And we built this model, and I'll turn this to Andy because Andy can speak to this so much better. I'll use tackling as the example. We started at the advanced levels. We said, what do you need to know and be able to do as an advanced tackler? The best tacklers in the world, what can they do? What can the best quarterbacks do? And we identified those core skills, those skill elements first, and we worked our way down and said, okay, so the very skills that we're teaching to a 5 and a 6-year-old about tracking and preparing themselves, or in the case of throwing, about your body position and your position, your posture, those are all things that the top level, most advanced quarterbacks do when they throw. The best tacklers in the world do this. We're just putting it at a developmental level that makes the most sense to you. So there's alignment. And our FDM is specifically built that way. There's common language. The skills build upon the skills. You track it as a 6, 7-year-old, you track as a 14, 15-year-old, same skill. We just increase the key performance indicators that you have to know as the skill increases. Andy's really good at explaining that piece too.
Yeah, I think it's similar to, we understand what the foundations are. So most of it comes down to making it age appropriate, making it logical as far as the pathway, and then presenting it in a manner that's appropriate for both our audience, being the coaches, and for the youth. So, I've talked about tackling, about tracking and preparation and tracking and evasion. And like that sounds really good and really football-y, right? And the high level strength and conditioning coach is talking about the agility games and mere variations they're doing in their off season as they progress from change of direction to agility training, but for kids, we're using those exact same concepts. But you know what it looks like? It looks like tag, it looks like sharks and minnows, it looks like capture the flag. So if you can, take the principles and boil them down and then present them and like you said, our thing is always, we want fun, engaging activities, which sounds better than drills at the youth level. I can still learn to track an opponent, right? Running away from my best friend playing tag as a kid was my intro level into evasion. Right now, we'll turn on the combine and somebody's going to talk about who's a great open field runner. Well, that's a great evasive abilities. And that also looks like the guy that never gets tagged playing. So if we deliver it in that manner, we're right. And so part of the challenge is, we have to make sure that we communicate and educate the high school coach on how the things we hope to do, right, translates into what they want at, a performance level big time high school that's doing all this cool stuff. But once they get that, then it makes complete sense to them. Oh, I see what they're learning. I see the foundations. I see what you're building. You know, high school coaches want a lot of kids to come out for their program. You know, nothing I think is worse for a high school coach than the stereotype of like seeing this, you know, this 6'2", 250-pound stud who had a terrible experience playing youth football and now only plays, you know, baseball and basketball, and the coach just can't get him to come out. Well, so they have some interest in making sure that we're providing a great experience to those youth, and that like we're keeping kids involved in the game, and then we're developing them in a good manner so that when they get to me, they can run, they can jump, they can cut. And you know, like I'm the head coach for a reason. Like I can teach them the other things, the icing on the cake, but it sure would be nice to have a baked cake by the time they got to me. The one thing that I am always cautious about when we talk about the kind of feeder programs and the way it works is that these can be very coach centric or they can be very player centric. And I use the example that a coach centric feeder program is going to focus really heavily on like, I want to get my offense and my defense installed. I want every youth program in my community to be running the same offense and the same defense so that by the time they get to high school, they've run it, you know, 10,000 times and they're masters at it. Well, that's pretty coach centric. The athlete centric version says, I want to develop great athletes who have all of the movement skills, the prerequisites, some sports skill development, and a great attitude about football and inherent love. That's really community and individual centric. So those programs just have to be done well, but when they are and you see them, it's really cool.
Andy, I'm so glad that you brought up the coaches who want to install offense and defense, and then they claim that they have a feeder program, right? Because that's all that they care about. They don't care about the general physical preparation and things that we've been talking about in this episode. All they care about are the X's and O's, right? Let's make sure that these kids understand our offense and our defensive schemes and whatever, and they miss out on all that other stuff. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Well, we say the reason general development is so important is because we don't know what that kid's going to be until post-puberty.
Yeah.
So if we start specializing and doing all this stuff, and then we know how kids' bodies change, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you got really tall and skinny, and you certainly filled out as you grew up. Like, so focusing on the general, if you say Mother Nature will take care of probably what position you fit best, and that we won't know that until after puberty. So let's focus a little more on the general. What are all position football skills? What are all position movement and general physical qualities? That's where the focus should be until we get past that tipping point.
And that's Joe. I was just going to capitalize on something Andy said there, and that's the paradigm that we really are working against. And it's about education, but it's also about changing perspective. And I think every time we talk about this specific thing, I think back when we did some pilot programs, and when we were just developing the curriculum and had some folks try it. And I remember presenting to one group, and I was talking about the need to teach using what we have our developmental checklists, and each says, hey, for this developmental range, here's what a child in this range should be able to do. And we base those off of nationally recognized physical education standards. And so we just applied them to football. So I remember presenting to this group, and I had a gentleman raise his hand, and he said, why do I need to teach my linemen how to throw? And I said, that's a really good question. I said, how old are your linemen? And he said, I coach 7 and 8-year-olds. And I said, because you aren't coaching linemen, you're coaching athletes that for you right now are some of them are playing the line, but more importantly, you're coaching an athlete. But that you get to, and so it didn't even register that. Why would I need my big kids at 7 and 8 years old that are playing on the line? Why do they need to practice throwing? Because throwing is an athletic skill. And what Andy just said, by the time they're 11 and 12, 13 years old, they might be the starting quarterback for the high school team. We don't know this. The bottom line is we're fighting against that paradigm and that mentality that says, hey, this kid's this size, so we put him in this position, or this kiddo can throw far, so we're just going to make him a quarterback or her a quarterback, but we're not going to, work on the other skills. That's that's about education. That's about getting coaches to see that importance of athletic foundation. Now, if that kid grows up to be a lineman, great, but we have a larger obligation and responsibility to them.
Yeah, super. Hey, last question. I said it once before. It's like this all makes too much sense. It's too logical. But what's it really going to take? What's it going to take USA football and people who love this great game in the United States for widespread implementation of the FDM? And maybe not only the implementation of it, but also its fidelity, right? You guys have great materials. We're going to direct everybody to those materials on the website. They have everything in their hands. They say that they're implementing it, but are they implementing it with fidelity, right? The degree to which you guys think it should be implemented as well. So thoughts on that? What's it really going to take for widespread implementation with fidelity?
I'll jump in here, and I think that the first answer is for me is time, consistency, and luckily for Mike and I, the stubbornness that we both possess. So what tends to happen is that we have great wins, but they're very community oriented. So, high school football is very community driven. And then the feeder programs or the youth in those places can be very community driven because it's a volunteer sport of parents. And we totally get that. So you get these awesome stories, but what's a shame is that sometimes the local communities, they see someone else having this great success, but like, well, that's that town and we're different. You know what I mean? Over here, we do it this way. And especially we've been successful this way. So I think everyone involved in the youth sports has probably come up across this, that, one great story in one town doesn't necessarily carry as much weight as we would have hoped to other towns sometimes. And so you have to just do the work of continuing to show them, that there's other ways to develop, that there's better ways to develop, the positive benefits of retention, of strong youth organizations, of developing better young people, humans first, athletes second, how, saying a tagline like human athlete football player doesn't mean we're actually not focusing on developing great football players. That process actually leads to better football players coming out the other end because they have these great diverse skill sets and kind of experiences and abilities to draw upon when they're out on the field. So, you work through those things. There's a lot of education, where a volunteer parent or even a high school football coach may know a ton about football, but they're a history teacher by trade. So understanding some of the literature and some of the supporting documentation might not be something they're overly interested in unless, they're really digging into it and having a good quality conversation. So addressing some of the traditions with what we know, with success stories, with what the data is telling us, with what's happening. The main question I ask, for what it's worth, is, because football has produced a lot of great players the way it's been played, right? We can look at the Hall of Fame. They've produced great players. So the challenge for us is we have to reframe the question. It's not how good have the results been doing it the way we have. The question is, how good could we be? And I think, just trying to do some simple reframing can unlock some doors to some thinking that allows us to make inroads.
I can answer that one pretty quickly, Joe, because we think about that a lot. How can we, it's one of the things we've got to be careful of, and I think everybody in this space has to be careful of, is that once we think we've got the right plan or a good idea, that's the end result. This has got to be a constant slow drip message all the time about what we do, especially in the youth space. But I would say this, think about two things, and I say this in a lot of the presentations we give when we talk about this. To people that aren't sure, they're like, what is this whole idea of long-term athlete development and aggressive skill development? If we focused on two things, that use two things to define our success. If the first one was that we really prioritized kids falling in love with movement and the game itself before we prioritize teaching them the sport. Not saying that teaching the sport's not important, but if we prioritized them different, if we said, let's focus our efforts on making sure they fall in love with the sport before we focus our efforts on teaching them every technical detail of the sport, we'll be ahead. And then if we measured our success by how many kids came back or stayed involved in that sport, or they stayed involved, then we would be onto something. And that's the way we change it, to keep our focus in that realm.
Yeah, Mike, you started off and you said this should be a top priority, right? We should be interested in this 100%. You people who follow me on social media and hear me talk, they know what I'm going to say. We know what to do. We need to do it. You guys have the materials. You guys have the materials available. We have the knowledge. We have the, scientific foundations of why the model is such as it is, but we just need to do it. And that's
I
implement.
would
And that,
take it even one step further. We know it. We know what to do. We even would say how important it is and we value it. But we have to be intentional and be stubborn and keep focusing on it. We change it by making it a priority. That's where intention comes in. Just valuing it and knowing what to do, to your point, Joe, doesn't change a thing. We have to do something like action oriented, but to do that, we have to be intentional about what we do and practices and games and the messages we send. And we also, I'll say this too, we have to be committed to people, the stakeholders that can be influencers, like high school coaches, like league leaders. If we can do this coach at a time, I get that, but we can't forget that systemic change happens with leadership, with those that are making the decisions, the influencers, the league presidents, the league administrators, the high school coaches. Those are people we have to continue sending a message to as well and get their buy-in, because that's where systemic change happens.
yeah, I'm going to take it one step further than that, Mike. I totally agree with you. And this was an idea, Andy and I talked about this on a few of our car rides. What I would love to see during Super Bowl Sunday is a 30-second commercial with Tom Brady promoting FDM. I'd like to see another 30-second commercial with Patrick Mahomes promoting the FDM. Next fall, I'd like to see Nick Saban on Saturday afternoons promoting FDM, right? Leadership from that level as well. Those are powerful leaders. And then you take it down to grassroots, which is so important. And we've talked about it here today. It's so important, grassroots. These high school coaches, you just mentioned that, Mike, right? Really promoting FDM, because it's not going to be done just with the staff at USA Football, right? This has to be football for all. This has to be the game that we change for the betterment of youth development and human development as well. So guys, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. This was so enjoyable. This was such an enjoyable episode for me. Really appreciate the work that you guys are doing at USA Football. And I'm assuming that everything the listeners need to know about the FDM can be found on the website. But if there's anything else that you guys want to add as we close out here that, was not said that you think is really important for listeners to understand about the USA Football development model, floor is yours.
Yeah, I would just say that, I think football development model, there's skill plans and looking at how we break down a skill over a lifetime and slowly layer more complexity to each skill. There's game types and everything, but it's not a copy and paste thing. It's really a philosophy, and it's driven by some great hard sciences. I think it's best expressed and best happens out in the field as a philosophy, where whether it's league leaders, whether it's the individual coach, whether it's groups of sports getting together in a community to say, we're going to do this the right way for our kids. And USA Lacrosse has a model, and USA Baseball has a model, and USA Football has a model. And, the sports that are offered in our community, we're going to have this nice, smooth transition. But it really is a philosophy that guides your work. And to Mike's point, once you can understand that and be intentional about it, it just becomes how you operate. And it's not like, saying, oh, we do the ADM, we do the FDM. It's just kind of how you operate. And so we provide resources, hopefully, to help educate people to the point that they can understand that line of thinking and that process, so that can come true. And for your first time volunteer coaches, there are some color by number guides to help those people get started. But I think those in leadership have to really take that tact, that this is a philosophy of how we're going to treat children in our communities.
I would second that. And I would say along with that, it is a philosophy, a way of thinking. And because of that, though, it can sometimes seem overwhelming. We talk about a lot of things with game types and skill progression. And so what I challenge people with, Joe, and one thing I'd say about the FDM, take what works for you right now. Learn what you can about how you impact that child. If it's just what am I doing in my league or my community to help develop a better athlete, not just a football player. How am I helping that child grow as a child, as a human being, cognitively, socially, emotionally? I have that obligation as a leader or stakeholder in this group. So what am I doing? You don't have to adopt everything all at once. You don't have to introduce flag and padded flag and everything all at once. Start somewhere and learning, just educating yourself on how can I make this a better experience. We started our whole development model by developing 6 core values, 6 pillars, and looking at those. And I start with that with leagues, and I say, look at those pillars and just ask yourself in your league, how am I doing those? How am I making the game more engaging and fun? How am I focusing on physical literacy and skill development? And for me, that might be learning what physical literacy is. That's okay. That's all it takes. Don't think you have to adopt the whole thing for it to be successful. Take the pieces that fit with your current reality, your current situation, and start. Let's start there. That's how change happens.
Great. Thanks again, guys. Thanks for everything that you do for America's game, for all the youth and the coaches and parents involved in this great sport. And hey, as we say, let's keep fighting the good fight.
Joe, back at you. Thanks for everything you do and for everything you've done for us. Can't overestimate the value of the work coming in, and you really have laid a foundation, and we've continued to hopefully build on that great work. And we know you're a great partner in this whole thing, and the work that you do is really, truly positively impacting so many communities, so many coaches, so many kids. And at the end of the day, it's the student athletes, and we're incredibly grateful to you for what you continue to do as well.
Yeah, thanks for those words, Mike. I really appreciate that.
I would second that, Joe. I mean, we've had some great chats, some great trips, some great experiences, but also thanks for the opportunity for us to come on here and spread this message, so that, you know, whether it's someone who wants to reach out, whether it's a single community, a single location that thinks this is interesting, or another professional who wants to know more about how we're attempting to do this in the sport of football to help their own work. You know, this is how we all get better at this. So the opportunity to share our message and what we're doing, and to hopefully help others, and to learn from others and build the community is hugely appreciated.
Great. So yeah, all that information again can be found on the FDM website, fdm.usafootball.com, and just going to the website and reaching out to these individuals at USA Football to impact positively the youth in your community. Thanks again, guys.